Sisters and brothers, please welcome back the president of the Ohio AFL-CIO, Tim Burga.
Thank you again, and sisters and brothers, let me just say it's a tribute to the leadership and resilience of our movement that even when the state of our union is in such disarray, the state of the trade union movement is strong. Union members have answered the call of this coronavirus pandemic every day and in every way. We've served, we've sacrificed, we've healed, we've honored the country we love, the country unions built. And that's why new research from Gallup, released just this month, puts our approval rating at 65%, one of our best marks in more than half a century. The problem, and more than that, the clear and present danger, is that too many of our country's leaders haven't honored us. They haven't served us well, they haven't protected us, they're letting our country crumble and our people suffer. Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell are at the top of that list. In normal times, with an election just over a month away and voting to start next week, I would speak to you solely about the issues that matter most to working people. To be sure, there is a dramatic difference on these issues between the two candidates seeking the office of the presidency, which I will address. But these are not normal times, and what's happening on November 3rd is not a normal election. This time, sisters and brothers, we're in for a battle over who we are as a nation and what we want to be. To some, this may sound overly dramatic. I assure you it isn't. Not merely because the incumbent president is a man who pays hush money to porn stars, separates migrant children from their parents, putting them in cages, says those that die in military combat are losers, or regularly lies and sows hatred, fear, and racial division. Most Americans reject this vile behavior, yet millions of people, too many of our own members, voted for Trump in 2016. Some voted for him because they didn't like Hillary Clinton, or maybe they were sick of politics as usual and thought we needed an outsider to shake up the system. Or maybe they believed that Trump would actually do some of the things he promised, like stand up for working people and drain the swamp of self-dealing Washington phonies who perpetually enrich themselves at our expense. But now it's 4 years later, and before we cast our ballots, we need to ask ourselves whether Donald Trump has actually kept his promises. So let me ask you, after 4 years of Donald Trump, are the lives of working people better? Are our jobs safer? Is our future brighter? Is our country stronger? The answer to all these questions is a resounding no. At its core, this election must be about us, about the working families we represent, and about which presidential candidate is most likely to have our backs over the next 4 years. Everyone knows that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, so let's look at the record. Donald Trump inherited an economy where 16 million new jobs were created under the Obama-Biden administration, and since he took office, prior to the pandemic, job creation slowed dramatically and wages stagnated. 4 years ago, Donald Trump promised to enact a comprehensive infrastructure plan to rebuild America and stand up for our building and construction trades. Ask the iron workers, the pipe fitters, and electricians. They remember. Promise broken. 4 years ago, Donald Trump promised to get tough on outsourcing and offshoring of our blue-collar jobs and bring manufacturing back. Ask the steel workers, CWA, IUE, the mine workers and machinists. They remember. He even went to Youngstown and told people not to move or sell their homes and promised that General Motors plant at Lordstown would stay open and stay put. But 4 years later, General Motors is gone, rewarded with Trump tax breaks and corporate stock buybacks, and the Mahoning Valley is left to pick up the pieces. This is playing out across the country as there are now 237,000 fewer manufacturing jobs and 7,000 fewer coal industry jobs than when Trump took office. More promises broken. If he cared about us, would he call for a boycott of a great company like Ohio's Goodyear simply because they asked their employees not to wear political garb when they're on the clock? And we remember it was Trump's Supreme Court that forced right to work into our public sector workplaces. Ask AFSCME, firefighters, nurses, and teachers. They will tell you this. And it's Trump's administration that is writing new rules for union busting and attacking our sacred institution of public education. Ask AFGE, postal workers, letter carriers, and AFT. They will tell you this. We must ask our members and Ohio workers who's on our side. The record is clear. Donald Trump has broken his promises and betrayed working people. Of course, to hear Trump tell it, the failing economy is all because of the coronavirus. The truth is, Trump has failed to deliver on the jobs he promised for us, and his handling of the pandemic has made matters much worse. We now have 30 million Americans out of work, the highest unemployment rate since the Great Depression in the 1930s. And it didn't have to be this way, sisters and brothers. The president lied to the American people about the danger of this virus and turned a pandemic into political battleground for his personal gain. As a result, it is no surprise that every industrialized country in the world is doing better than we are. Why is America the only industrialized nation whose unemployment rate literally tripled? Why does America, which has just 4% of the world's population, have 26% of the world's coronavirus cases and more than 200,000 deaths? Our healthcare workers, first responders, transportation workers, corrections officers, food service workers, they felt the brunt of this. And we ask, why hasn't the president put in place an emergency OSHA standard to help keep us safe? The answer is because Donald Trump doesn't care about us and he isn't capable of being president. He is absolutely responsible for the botching, the response, and politicizing it. In short, our lives have been turned upside down because Donald Trump never had a plan to deal with the virus. And now, more than 9 months later, he still doesn't. He says it's not his responsibility. And whenever something goes wrong, he blames somebody else. Nothing, and I mean nothing, is ever Donald Trump's fault. You know, Harry Truman, he had a sign on his desk that said, "The buck stops here." Trump's sign, if he had one, would say, "The buck stops everywhere but here." They say crises have a way of revealing leaders and exposing incompetence. Well, the pandemic has certainly exposed Trump, and the last thing America needs is another 4 years of his epic failures. Fortunately, we have an alternative because unlike Trump, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris do know how to lead. They have a plan to move us forward, and they're laying it out to the American people. They call it Build Back Better, and it's based on what we in organized labor know is true, that given the right tools and a fair chance, American labor can still outwork, outproduce, and outcompete any other country on the face of the earth. Biden's Build Back Better plan calls for a tax break for companies that bring jobs back to America and a tax increase on those that outsource our jobs. The Biden-Harris plan calls for over $1 trillion investment in our country's infrastructure that will create good-paying building and construction jobs and equip the American middle class to compete and win in the global economy. Sisters and brothers, we need a friend of workers to lead us out of this pandemic and record unemployment crisis. Vice President Biden will lift up our local communities that have been devastated by job loss and industrial decline by restoring manufacturing, investing in infrastructure and public works, the scope that we've not seen since the New Deal. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will renew support for public education and our most valued public assets and create the jobs of tomorrow. Joe Biden knows that when working people succeed, the country prospers. He will ensure workers have a voice and a seat at the table as we recover our health, our economy, and start unrigging the system so every American has a fair shot of living out their dreams. Finally, what about race relations in this country, which I think we can all agree are the worst they've been in more than 50 years. As a labor movement, we will continue our role in the struggle for social justice and civil rights so that we can move forward together to rid society of bigotry and racism. The killings of unarmed people of color have been going on for centuries. The difference now is we are seeing these deaths play out on television and social media for the world to see. Even so, Donald Trump still can't bring himself to mention the victims' names and say Black Lives Matter. but he has no trouble at all calling the white supremacists and neo-Nazis who rioted in Charlottesville very fine people. Joe Biden knows the difference between those who hate and those who fight against it. But he also knows the difference between peaceful protest and lawless rioting. So while Biden and Harris will fight for reform and an end to police misconduct, they also know there is never an excuse for arson, looting, and other criminal behavior in the streets of our cities. What we need now are leaders who will bring out the best in us, those that seek to unite rather than divide. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will put us on a pathway of healing and reform, striving for a more perfect union. And that brings us full circle back to where I started these remarks and where I will also end them. Those of us who have a duty to engage in politics often say that the next election is the most important election of our lifetime. But this is no exaggeration. The November election is not only the most important in any of our lifetimes, it's the most important one since 1864, when the country chose to preserve the Union by re-electing Abraham Lincoln. Isn't it ironic? Preserving the Union then required the re-election of the nation's first Republican president, while preserving it now requires the defeat of the latest Republican president. Why does Donald Trump pose such an existential threat? Because he believes in nothing beyond his own will to power. To him, preserving democratic norms matters little, and the rule of law matters even less. Abroad, he cozies up to the world's worst dictators while he bullies and belittles longtime friends and allies. At home, the Trump presidency is riddled with corruption, self-dealing, and manipulating the levers of government in order to punish enemies and pardon his pals. Now he's trying to preserve his grip on power by kneecapping the post office, and he's even hinted that he may not leave office if he loses the election. No, my friends, 2020 is not a normal election. Decency, and for the first time in modern history, democracy itself are on the ballot. But we have the power to bring change and to shape the future. Over the next 5 weeks, every trade union leader is called on to give everything we've got to get votes for all our endorsed candidates, starting at the top of the ticket with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And this is the election to go clear through the ballot and not stop until you vote for our Supreme Court candidates, Jennifer Brunner and John O'Donnell, so we can end the era of rigged legislative maps. We are fortunate this election. Talking about Joe Biden to a trade unionist is easy. Joe knows us and we know Joe. Joe Biden has a long record of standing up for us and a plan to build back better. And he wants to do it with us because he believes empowering workers and unions is the American way to win for all. He knows it's the trade union movement that delivers for America, and he wants to be our president so he can deliver for us. Sisters and brothers, this is worth fighting for. On November 3rd, we must vote to keep America, America. And on November 3rd, we must do everything we can to put Joe Biden in the White House and send Donald Trump back to his Florida country club where he belongs. Thank you, and now let's get out there and work like our jobs and our way of life depend on it, because they do.